Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, I'm really excited about having this guest on the show because he is an expert in a realm that I spent over 15 years in. And in being able to incorporate that into the business-to-business digital marketing, interactive marketing, and then ultimately sales activities and customer retention activities is really vital. It's an overall systematic approach that all organizations have to take. And if you miss one part of essentially this three-legged stool, meaning marketing, sales, and member or client or customer experience, you're missing out on some important opportunities that could cause you to disrupt your competition. So I actually have John O'Connor on the show with me today. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Jim. Delighted to be here.
I've given a little bit of insight to the what you do, but if you could share with the B2B DM gang your background and experience with B2B marketing.
Sure. Okay. Well, I came into B2B marketing through a fairly circuitous route because I'm an engineer by background. So I did mechanical engineering in Trinity College Dublin half a century ago, literally almost half a century ago. And I ended up working as an engineer down a coal mine in South Africa for my sins for a few years. Decided after 3 years that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life working in a coal mine. So I went off and did a master's in business administration in London, still couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Ended up saying I'd become a consultant for a few years, and I joined Accenture. So I was in the strategy practice of Accenture. It was a big kind of tech company. All the stuff I was doing was kind of mainly working with people on market and sales strategies. And I did that for about 13 years before jumping into a company called Deep Insight, which is where I've been for the last 15 years. And Deep Insight is a B2B marketing and almost account management company. But kind of towards the end of my period in Accenture, I was leading their CRM practice in the Dublin office or in Ireland. And I also managed to get myself involved in writing a book at that stage, which is called Marketing in the Digital Age. It's actually quite amusing when you read it back now, because this is 20 years ago. So the digital age 20 years ago is a little bit different to the digital age now. And yet the funny thing is, because I was trying to read the textbook this morning again, just to see how out of date we actually were. The core principles of marketing are still exactly the same. It's just, the technology has evolved and probably moved in different directions to what we thought it would be 20 years ago. So that's kind of how I got into the whole digital marketing B2B stuff. And stuff we do with Deep Insight is it's purely business to business. It's primarily around customer retention. And if you strip it down to its basics, all we do is we ask so our clients are people like BT, British Telecom, Serco, Atos, AXA, QBE down in Australia, big business-to-business companies across a variety of different industries. They will typically have a relatively small number of large corporate clients or government clients, but they're quite complex relationships. So you could have 20, 50, or even 100 people in a client that have a view on you and your service. So it's quite difficult if you're a marketing person or a sales director to get your hands around what's actually happening within that client relationship. Our job is just simply to go out and ask our clients' customers what they think of their relationship with our client. And we've got some smart questions and a methodology and a bunch of other stuff as well. But it's driven around trying to really understand what's happening inside in that complex relationship where the client might be worth 10 million, 100 million, 500 million a year alone. So that's the sort of fun stuff we do these days.
Well, and talking about that fun stuff and referring to deep insights and different perspectives, is that I often find it very interesting to study things that are outside of your own perception of what your organization is and who your customer is, because that's where the nuggets of opportunity lie.
Yeah.
So if you start looking at the creative thinking process and the innovative process, it isn't by continuing to play in your own sandbox, if you think about it that way. It's going and looking at the toys in somebody else's.
It is. Yeah. Jim, a good example of that is yesterday I was on a call with, it's an English law firm called DWF, and they've got offices in the States as well. They think they're the largest publicly quoted law firm in Europe. And they brought Deep Insight on board because they didn't want somebody who works with law firms. They want to be a business. And they said, we'd like, you guys work for some of our clients. Why don't you give us a perspective from what a big corporate thinks about customers and customer retentions, rather than, us in the law world, because we're quite focused in on legal stuff. And we think we'll probably learn more from other companies than we learn from our own profession.
And when you say that, it starts me to thinking down the path of what we normally do. What we normally do is we want to look for people that are like us and what they're doing. And it's not what we should be doing, especially if we want to differentiate, if we want to disrupt, if we want to, take market share, if we want to retain, our customers versus giving them a reason to look at others. Yeah.
So actually, which is an interesting point too, because most of my clients say, can you tell us where we are in our industry? Give us how are we doing against the benchmark? And so the first thing we say is, look, benchmarking is a waste of time, guys, particularly if it's your own industry, because if you want to be a mediocre company, then benchmark yourself against your industry, and we can tell you whether you're above or below the average. In other words, if you want to be mediocre, just do that benchmark. So we normally set a benchmark, which is, it's an external benchmark, and it says, do you guys want to be unique? And we have a unique benchmark, which is across any industry. And it's equivalent to the top 10% of our database. But it's based on the views of our clients' customers as to whether they think our client is unique or not. And that's unique in two dimensions. It's unique in terms of the relationship that they have with our client and the solution that our client offers to them. And I say solution rather than product, because they're two very, very different things. Solution to us is around, are you producing something that helps me move my business forward and makes me more successful in the marketplace? So it's not, have you got the best technical solution? Are you the best value for money? It's a lot more than that.
Well, so let's talk about the whole passion element of all of this, and meaning that, when you and I had talked off mic for a little bit, and one of the things that's really important, even if we just kind of separate out, you and I talked about geographic uniqueness, talking about UK, US, Asia, and how let's just kind of move that subtleness away. But let's talk about how things have changed in regards to how organizations need to take those deep insights and feed them back into the entire digital marketing process. Because you and I even talked about, well, it used to be like digital marketing had, let's just throw some numbers out there and we can argue this, but we're not going to do that. 30% importance in my overall relationship building and retention. But now in the world that we're now having to live in, and I don't see it going back, it's now like 70 to 80% of the importance is into that. So I need to take these deep insights and feed them all into that type of presentation, engagement, perception building. So tell us a little bit about that.
So actually, I probably make the point that I think regardless of where we are at the moment, and regardless of whether we're forced to sit behind computer screens rather than go out and meet people physically face to face, if I look at any organization, what I try to do with the CEOs and with the senior leadership teams that I meet is I try to get them to think about how they make their customers more customer centric. And a lot of companies are going to say, well, look, to be customer centric, I need a CSAT program, or I need a net promoter score program, and I need to understand what my customers are thinking. And they'll jump straight in and they'll try to put in the tools. And we wrote another book. I swore after the last book that I would never write another book again in my life. And I actually went off and did it. So we came up with a book called Customer at the Heart. And we did it based on a series of interviews with CEOs, MDs, chief customer officers, chief sales officers, marketing directors across Europe and down in Australia. I don't think we had any US people that we interviewed. But one of the interesting things is when you talk to the CEO or a sales director of a company, particularly a large organization, you begin to realize that it's not just about the tools. It's not just about the digital piece and the technology. We basically came up with kind of 4 quadrants in a circle. So if you think of a circle where at the top you've got the customer, at the bottom you've got the executive team. On one side, you have what I call the soft side, the other side what you call the hard side. Hard side is stuff which lends itself to KPIs, numbers, metrics, and so on. And the soft side is basically the people side. So down in the bottom right is a thing called leadership. So leadership is its soft side, and it's very much with the management team. So the most important thing if you're running any sort of a customer experience, customer feedback, CSAT, Net Promoter Score, whatever you want to call it, customer retention program is, it has to be driven by the top. So you need leadership. I'll give you the 4 quadrants and I'll come back to them. So you need leadership, strategy, execution, and culture. Leadership is the most important one. You have to have the CEO or the sales director of the company driving the program and actually being passionate about it, so that every single all-hands call they have with their teams, the customer or a customer is mentioned first of all. It's not about financials. It's not about operational issues. It's about the customer, and my last visit to that customer is this. The second thing you need is strategy. And by strategy, we mean, this is kind of getting more now towards the kind of the hard side, where we're saying we're taking feedback from customers and we are then going to push that into the way we segment our customers, the way we do our account management, the way our products are actually manufactured. Because actually, traditionally, we build products because we've got a bunch of good techie people over here, and they're very, very good at manufacturing products. We never quite put the product team and the customer into the same room. So if you're in marketing or you're in sales, you have to take the customer and actually stick them into the product team. You have to stick them into the operations team, because we build operations to be good for our needs, not for the customer's needs. So unless you have the leadership, you won't be able to build those into your operational strategy, your sales strategy, your customer segmentation strategy, and so on. The third piece then is what we call execution. This is where people normally kind of jump in and say, well, we need a CX program. We need we call it CRQ, customer relationship quality. We need a CRQ program. And those are having the tools, the techniques, the governance structures in place, and all that sort of good stuff. And there it needs to be led actually by sales rather than by marketing. So close your ears, anybody out there in marketing, because you can't sit in an ivory tower. This has to be done as close as possible to where the customer is. What we normally find is that when you run these customer programs, they tend to be coordinated by marketing, but the really successful ones are actually driven by the sales teams. It's the account teams who own the program. And then the final piece is culture. This is basically where you get the entire organization pointing themselves towards the customer. It's the account teams, the service teams, it's the product development guys, it's the operational back office people who say, there's no point in doing this because that's not what the customer wants. But they'll only do that if they see the leadership constantly talking about the customer. So you get into this virtuous circle. As I said, what a lot of companies do is they jump straight into the execution piece. They get the tools right, and then they wonder, why am I only getting 20% response rate from my customer feedback program when it should be 50, 60, 70%? Why is nothing fundamentally changing? You need all 4 quadrants. And the digital piece in there, in some ways, is actually relatively small, because you get down to the basics of customer relationships. They're built around trust and commitment and some fairly kind of soft stuff. The technology is just the enabler. So, when I was looking back at that very first book that I wrote, The Marketing in the Digital Age, Yeah, the digital age has changed, but actually all the marketing principles are the same. And actually the core thing I remember that we talked about in that book was the importance of a good customer database at the center of everything. Now, I think things have moved on, but fundamentally you need to have anything to do with the customer, whether it's their needs, their wants, their aspirations, their contacts, our interactions with them. That all should sit in your CRM system. But we rarely kind of put all of that stuff in the CRM system. And we rarely get everybody to share that information and to stick it into the same CRM system. So it's funny, 20 years ago, we were talking about how difficult it was to get salespeople and service people to buy into the concept of Salesforce automation. Nowadays, we're still getting the same problem getting to use Microsoft Dynamics and Salesforce.
Well, as you're talking, though, I start thinking about if I'm not in a situation where we're already have the framework in place, marketing does have the opportunity to start driving some of that change. And so, because, if I'm taking this information and I'm asking these questions to be able to feed it back into, that congruency, if we're saying we're customer centric, it needs to happen and be felt all the way through. And it's a feeling. However, that feeling is very tangible, because otherwise the deep insights that you're collecting, it would be all false data, right?
Yeah. We had a few years ago, I wrote a blog or a series of blogs that was called Susan and Bill Have Relationship Problems. And Susan was the sales director and Bill was the marketing director. So the whole kind of concept was around how you get these two people who come from slightly different perspectives to actually work together to do the right thing for the customer. And marketing has a key role to play, but they also have to get the salespeople or the service people or the people who are in the face of the customer on a day-to-day basis. They need to be working very closely with them. And, even still, we still tend to have very siloed organizations, even in relatively small companies. Certainly the large ones, you've got the sales organization sits over here, the marketing organization sits over there. The product guys are somewhere in the back office. We never see those guys, or we don't want to see them. They're good. Those are the guys with the pointy heads, and we don't want to talk to them. You have to get them all together if you want to make this work.
Most definitely. Okay, so that starts leading me to when you start looking at a lot of the tactics and practices and things that people talk about that they need to do in order to be able to do and have the impact that you're talking about. And this is going back to the whole sandbox thing. Yeah. Some of the things that you're doing with some of these very large organizations absolutely can be executed and accomplished, in those smaller organizations. So it works for everyone. But I have to ask you, from your perspective, what are some of the things from a digital marketing perspective that you just think are just overrated?
Probably most of it, I would think. Okay, so let's take a couple of examples. Artificial intelligence, great, but we haven't figured out how to use that in a marketing perspective really yet. AI is still being used, and actually being used kind of quite well to sort out delivery or operational stuff for the most part. Maybe we'll get there, but I think if you kind of go back to it, the fundamentals of it, when you're selling or marketing to people, this is all about trying to understand the perspective of a human being at the other end of a telephone or at the other end of a coffee table. Telephone these days more than coffee tables. And the digital piece really is just a facilitator in that. Sometimes I think we hide behind the technology and we think that the technology will solve all of our problems. If you're in big B2B sales, frankly, you can sell or fail to sell a contract worth 100 million a year, but you only need to talk to 10 people. But you need to know exactly what those 10 people are looking for, and you need to know them individually, intimately as people. So, I'm being tongue-in-cheek when I say, most of the digital marketing, most of the digital stuff is not really that relevant. Yeah, it's relevant in a facilitative point of view, but we shouldn't hide behind the fact that we are dealing with individuals, people, human beings, and we're trying to solve their business problems and we're trying to make them more successful. So only view the digital stuff as an enabler and don't let it get in the way of really understanding what are the feelings of the individual on the other side of the table who's thinking of buying from me or thinking of buying from my company? What are they actually trying to achieve? What's their business problem, and how can I solve that for them? So, I kind of come back at this from, we used to take a very wide definition of marketing in my old days, which kind of, it's more kind of sales-driven marketing than anything else. And certainly in the top end of B2B, a lot of your marketing tends to be done on an account basis. It's account-based marketing. Most of that is around just physically walking around the client site, talking to people, and getting to understand what they need. Now, technology can help to try to capture that, pull that together into kind of one place. Hence, kind of going back to things like CRM systems. But ultimately, if you're trying to build long-term relationships at the big end of the B2B scale, it's all about personal relationships still.
Well, and I think, to me, I think that's the important message that you're really bringing forth here. So if we were to talk about digital marketing, right? And I want to be a disruptor. I want to, be that organization that is, capturing market share, that's capturing attention, that is, connecting with the needs of my ideal, prospect or customer, because I do have that longer sales cycle. I know there's going to be multiple relationships. What do I need to do in order to be a disruptor?
I think just use a technology that's already there. We've been talking about, we used to call it Salesforce automation 20 years ago. I say now it seems like Microsoft Dynamics with Salesforce and a bunch of other things. People don't use those properly in most organizations. They're kind of old-fashioned tools in some ways these days, but that is the core of your digital marketing capability for most companies. And it should be the place that you capture and stick everything relating to all of our interactions with each client. So if I've got one large client where there may be 100 contacts in there, as I say, it might be worth 10 million a year, 100 million a year to me. Everything that I do should sit into that kind of repository, and I should be using that to try to build account-based marketing strategies. And I can only do that if everybody in my organization is linked into it and is feeding stuff into it, and actually I can make use of it. The collaboration tools, I think these are getting better. We're doing this on Zoom. Most people are starting to use Microsoft Teams. So those capabilities of collaborating are there, but the core of any customer-based stuff really should sit in that central CRM system. So like if you gave me $1 million in the morning and said spend it on anything, I would say go and invest it in your CRM system, but use it properly, and think about that framework I was talking about. I would probably take half of that $1 million and I'd put it into soft stuff, and I'd probably put very little of it actually into the technology. I put an awful lot into training, into working with the leadership team, maybe changing out some of my leadership team who are not customer-centric enough. So I again take a holistic view of this. Don't throw all the money into technology, and think of technology just as the enabler. So digital marketing, it sounds kind of high-tech. It doesn't have to be, and it probably shouldn't be.
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying is...
I've probably ruined your show now, Jim. Apologies for that.
No, not at all. And the reality is, for me, when I start talking about B2B digital marketing, fundamentals, you use that word. That's important, because oftentimes we'll get disconnected from fundamentals, and then if we're lucky, we'll come back to the fundamentals. You talked about tool optimization, which I also think is critically important, especially when you start talking about remote work. I have, for example, 5 people, supposedly doing the same thing for their different areas of responsibility, yet they're all doing it quite differently. They're all using the tools quite differently. And I think we often forget, that whole element that you talked about in regards to, uplifting in skills, right? Because and when it comes to any tool, we're just going to make it functional for us, and then we're just going to repeat that pattern, right? It doesn't mean that we're optimized. It doesn't mean that we're getting the most out of it, most value from it. It doesn't mean that we're converting that. So all of these things are critically important, and your perspective is vital, because going back to what I had said, I spent 15 plus years in the customer experience measurement world. I mean, it was it was associated with those that were being served in a contact center, right? So it's, hey, measure my experience. Yeah. However, those deep insights that we were able to provide back to clients were vitally important to some of those key metrics that you're talking about, like the whole net promoter or whatever I'm using, customer sat, customer effort. I mean, all of these different KPIs and metrics that could be, used in order to be able to deepen the relationship. But whether or not they used them was a different story. Whether or not they used their tools that were currently existing, was a different story. So I think there's a whole lot of fundamental things that we need to focus in on that you shared. So ruining my show? Absolutely not. I mean,
let me just pick up a point. You're talking about kind of contact centers and KPIs and stuff. One of the things actually that most companies I think still struggle with is understanding the cadence or the frequency with which they should be getting customer feedback. So most of the stuff that we do at Deep Insight is around trying to get an annual strategic conversation going with the client. So you're talking pretty kind of big conceptual stuff with clients at a really senior level. We do that once a year, typically with most of our clients. You might say once a year. Does that give you kind of enough feedback to make a difference? Don't you need to put your finger on the pulse more regularly? And the answer is yes, you do. But you do that kind of through tactical metrics. So if you're working in a call center, I want to know probably hour by hour whether we've got an issue. I certainly want a daily update. And if we've got an outage or a problem somewhere, I need to know that kind of as it's happening, not a week later, and certainly not a month later. But so you need to take those feedback loops in at least two different levels, and maybe three. So you've got the tactical level, which is done very frequently, but it is tactical and very, very transactional. At a strategic level, annually is usually enough, because what that gives you is that basically gives you the program of work that the leadership team needs to start thinking about for the next 12 months. And it requires making some pretty big calls, probably on investments. And that could be investments in people as well as technology, or re-engineering of processes, or coming up with a new product that actually fits what the customer wants rather than what we think is good for the customer. So we tend to find that a 12-monthly cadence for those strategic conversations actually is fine, but you do need to supplement it with much more regular stuff. And the really good people have figured out just how to harmonize the two and get them to work and sync together.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring out. The whole strategic relational type of measurement and the tactical transactional, they do have to work in harmony. One will help bring insight to the other, because ultimately when you start talking about a lot of these strategic numbers, the question starts becoming why, how, what, and that's where your transactional types of measurements can hopefully fill in those gaps. But then we can spend all day long talking about methods and methodologies and scales, and it gets crazy quite fast. But
I'm happy to do that as well, Jim, if you want to. let's not for the moment.
Yeah, we can start, bashing Net Promoter, but I don't think that's appropriate. It's too easy, and it's easy to beat up the other KPIs too. But I think the point is, going back to what we had talked about, fundamentals and focus on the customer. Okay, so then how do we do that, right? And then how do we feed that back into the whole client retention component? How do we shorten our sales cycle, and take it and maybe shave off a month or two? How do we understand all of these different constituents and personas, that are part of the buying process? Because that's one thing that has changed as well with, talking about our new reality is looking at some of the studies on how people decide. More people are getting involved with the sales decision.
They are, although again, I was on a conference call earlier this week when that very topic was being mentioned. I'm slightly skeptical about some of this stuff because I think that is true when you're buying in a transactional fashion. I think, again, if you're talking about big bids with large companies and you're talking about a contract that might be 3, 5, 7 years long, and both parties it's going to cost both parties a lot of money to just do the evaluation, never mind get into that contract. These are big deals where the basis of the deal is actually trying to tease out between two organizations what each other's capabilities are and what the fit is. A lot of that stuff you can't really do by trolling the internet in advance. You can do it if you want to, like if I want to buy a phone or if I want to buy another one of these things. I'll have done all of my research before I get on and buy it. And that's a B2B sale. I guess I'm thinking more around, it's the top end of your customer base, the Pareto rule, where you've got 70% of your business is coming actually from a very small number of customers. Those ones you need to really understand intimately. And that's, I think, where some of the digital marketing stuff, we kind of almost need to downplay it and get back to the basics, get back to how do we kind of build relationships with people and how do we share our knowledge amongst all of our people about what all of their people are thinking, so we can actually work together. So, maybe it's more the kind of the collaboration and breaking down the silos that's important, and using technology to do that rather than just using technology for technology's sake.
That's a great point. So you talked about where you would spend your money. You talked about what you would quit doing. But I have to come and ask you, with all of this and everything that we talked about, including the fundamentals, geographic nuances, and all those things, what does a digital, B2B marketer really need to be asking themselves?
So I think if you are in marketing, if you're a digital marketeer, the one question you need to ask yourself is, how am I going to work with sales to get more revenues into this company? And again, I kind of go back to that blog that I wrote, which is the Bill and Susan story about how they're having relationship problems. This is about, we're actually having problems with our relationship with our customers, but we need to work together because we've actually got different agendas. So I'm Bill, the marketing director. I need to produce a net promoter score because the guys upstairs need to have that number. I'm Susan, I'm the sales director. I don't give a whatever about the NPS score. I just want to make more sales. I can conceptually understand that NPS drives sales, but I'm coming at it from a completely different angle. So if you're in marketing, I think you have to try to get as close as you can to the customer. And the easiest way of doing that is just go and spend an awful lot more time with the people out doing the sales. So talk to the sales people, talk to the service people, find out how marketing can help those, because they'll basically sell your marketing capabilities into the organization.
I think that right there, talking about fundamentals. I was working with a client to help with the sales enablement, and I had a salesperson come to me and say, thank you. And I said, what for? Because I had just met her. And she said, your work has enabled me to make sales a lot easier and to make connections a lot faster. And I'm like, job done.
Yeah, that's it.
And
it's
so
easy. It's easy.
Yeah, that was easy. And I didn't even know I did it. No, but I think that's really the important, thing to really walk away with here is when the day is all said and done, that is the fundamental that we need to be able to execute upon. And so the KPI, talking about KPIs, the difference between, a market or marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead, I think that just needs to become qualified lead.
Yeah. And I think, most of these leads, if you're talking about leads for not new logos that you're trying to get onto your company webpage, but if they're leads for existing clients where you've already been working with these people for the last 10 years, it's around how can you both kind of work together to try to close that lead. And in some ways, I don't mind whether that takes 2 months longer to close or 2 months shorter. That's not really relevant to me. The key thing is that we actually close it and we start increasing the footprint we have in that particular client organization. In some ways, some of the advice I give to our clients, if you're a sales guy, try not to sell. Try to listen to your customer, try to find out what it is what their problems, and slowly you'll kind of work on solutions, and they'll come to you. The sales will come. You don't need to be kind of an aggressive salesperson who's trying to close everything this month, never mind this quarter. Spend more time using these two things rather than this one thing.
I love that you said that, because I actually had an email interaction with somebody who was referred to me. I had never met this gentleman, and I did some research on him, and he just quips back a quick email and says, tell me how you can help me.
Yeah.
Like, well, I really don't even know what your needs are. I really don't, understand, what you're trying to accomplish. I don't, and I said it would be foolish of me to sit here and say, I knew how I can help you.
Yeah.
And he replied back and said, well, he goes, then I really don't have time to meet. And I'm like, well, then we're not a right fit.
Exactly.
Because I'm not going to be someone who's just going to try to do something just totally inappropriate and say I can help you in a way without having that basis of understanding. So thanks for sharing that.
And actually, just find on that point, Jim, I think in some ways, if you actually made that sale to that person, you possibly could be doing yourself more damage in the long term. I think if you can't find a natural fit between what it is that you do as a company and an organization, and even as an individual with those clients, you run the risk of having kind of a series of transactional relationships rather than kind of proper, deep, long-term, meaningful relationships with clients. So one of the things I always say to my clients is our methodology basically takes customers and they break them into kind of 5 or 6 different buckets, from ambassadors, who are the most loyal and love you to death, all the way through to what we call stalkers and opponents. And stalkers and opponents should be no more than about 5 or 10% of your database or your customer base. But it's where everybody kind of focuses in on. These guys gave us a horrible score. How do we turn that relationship around? And the first thing I say is, do you actually want to turn that relationship around? Would you be better off taking that customer by the hand, walking them down the road and passing them over to the competition? Because chances are they're not profitable at the moment. The chances are you may not ever be able to service their needs. So would you be better off just cutting them loose in a nice way? Now, you may well find some of them are big clients, and some of them actually they are a very good fit with what we do, but we just kind of run into this particular roadblock, and we just do need to get through that roadblock. But it's worth asking the question, is this the right fit in the first place? So even from a marketing or from a sales point of view, be very clear, I think, about who your target customers are, even within your customer base as it stands. And don't be afraid to shed customers if it allows you to reallocate sales and marketing resources elsewhere where they can be more productive.
Talking about the fundamentals, it's a long-term, type of scenario and timeline. It's not something quick. So, John, I'll tell you, I've had a great time talking to you today. Can you please share how the B2B DM gang can get in touch with you?
Probably the easiest is john.o'connor@deepinsight.com, or just go onto our website, deep-insight or deep-insight.com. And if you're interested in hearing more about how Bill and Susan are getting along with their relationship problems, I'll share that link with you, and you might want to pass it on to the gang.
Sounds good. John O'Connor, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Jim. Take care.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.